Well, child, settle yourself in that chair and prepare to hear a story that will break your heart before healing it again. This one here is different from the others I've been telling. It's not about supernatural creatures or evil gunfighters, but about something much more real and much more terrible, the destructive power of nature and the even greater power of maternal love when put to the test 12. I'm talking about the Great Fire of Copper Valley, which happened in the scorching summer of 1883, when I was 24 years old and had just married my dear Thomas. It was the year I met Martha Sullivan, a woman who would become the most unlikely heroine the Arizona Territory had ever seen. Copper Valley was a small community, nestled between two mountain ranges in what they now call the Sonoran Desert. It wasn't much more than a collection of ranches scattered along a narrow valley, where brave families tried to scratch out a living from the arid and unforgiving land. Water came from a creek that ran through the center of the valley, fed by snowmelt from the mountains, and it was this precious water that made life possible in that God-forsaken place. Martha Sullivan arrived in the valley in the spring of '83. Coming from the east with her two small children, Tommy, 6 years old, and little Sarah, only 4. She was a widow, her husband having died of typhoid fever during the harsh winter in Kansas, and she had sold everything she owned to buy a wagon and try her luck in the territory. She was a small woman, Martha, no more than 5 feet tall and thin as a willow branch, but there was something in her blue eyes that spoke of an inner strength that many men twice her size didn't possess. She always wore her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her hands, though small, were calloused from hard work and as steady as any frontierman's. Martha managed to buy a small piece of land at the northern end of the valley, where she built a modest cabin with the help of neighbors. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms with a wooden roof and adobe walls, but it was hers, and she was determined to make it work. What made Martha special wasn't just her determination, but her natural way with children. Within a few weeks of her arrival, she had offered to care for other families' children when parents needed to travel to the nearest town for supplies, or when emergencies rose that required both parents to be away. Mrs. Sullivan has a way with the little ones, Mrs. Henderson used to say, whose 3 children loved spending time at Martha's cabin. It's as if she knows exactly what they're thinking, what they need to hear to feel safe, and it was true. Martha had infinite patience with children, an ability to transform the most mundane tasks into exciting adventures. She taught the girls to sew by telling stories of brave princesses, and taught the boys to care for animals by talking about knights and their noble deeds. During that first summer, Martha's cabin became an unofficial meeting point for the valley's children. When parents were busy with harvest or urgent repairs, they knew they could leave their children with Martha and that they would be not only safe, but happy. But the summer of '83 was different from all others Arizona had ever seen. The rain that normally fell in spring never came, leaving the vegetation dry as straw. The heat was relentless, day after day of temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Without a single cloud in the sky to offer relief, the creek that gave life to the valley began to diminish. First slowly, then more rapidly, until, by the end of July, it was little more than a thread of water running over exposed stones. The animals grew restless, horses whinnied nervously for no apparent reason, and even the birds seemed to have abandoned the region. It's going to be a difficult summer, Thomas told me one evening as we sat on our porch, watching the sunset paint the sky blood red. I've never seen the land so dry, nor the animals so agitated. It's as if nature itself is preparing for something terrible. He was right, of course. Nature was preparing for something terrible, something that would test the courage and determination of all of us, but especially of a small widowed woman who had promised to protect the children entrusted to her care 12. The morning of August 15th, 1883, dawned clear and still, child. With not even the whisper of a breeze to stir the parched grass that covered Copper Valley like a brown carpet. Why? Ting for a match. The air itself seemed to shimmer with heat even before the sun had fully risen, and there was a quality to the silence that made every living creature hold its breath. As if the world was waiting for something terrible to begin. I remember that morning so clearly because it was the day I was supposed to visit Martha Sullivan to help her with the preserving of what little fruit her struggling apple trees had managed to produce. Thomas had ridden out early to check on our cattle, and I was looking forward to spending the day with Martha and whatever children might be staying with her. But as I was preparing to leave our ranch, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the horizon to the south, where the mountains met the sky, there was a thin column of smoke rising into the still air. It was barely visible at first, just a grey smudge against the blue. But even as I watched, it seemed to be growing thicker and darker. Fire, I whispered to myself, the word carrying all the terror that every frontier dweller felt when they saw that dreaded sight. In a land where everything was tinder dry and water was scarce, fire was the enemy that could destroy everything you'd worked for in a matter of hours. I saddled my horse as quickly as I could and rode toward Martha's cabin, my heart pounding with a fear that I couldn't quite name. The smoke column was definitely growing larger, and now I could see that it wasn't just one fire but several, scattered across the southern mountains like the fingers of some giant's hand reaching toward our peaceful valley. When I reached Martha's cabin, I found her standing in her doorway, shading her eyes with her hand as she stared at the same ominous sight that had sent me racing across the valley. But she wasn't alone. Scattered around her small yard were 12 children, ranging in age from little 3-year-old Emma Patterson to 12-year-old Jacob Morrison, Abby. Martha called when she saw me approaching, her voice steady but tight. With concern, "Thank God you're here. Have you seen Thomas this morning, or any of the other men?" "Thomas rode out to check the cattle before dawn," I replied, dismounting quickly. "What about the other parents? Where is everyone?" Martha's face was pale beneath her sunbonnet, but her voice remained calm as she explained the situation. "The Hendersons left yesterday for Tucson to buy supplies. They won't be back for 3 days. The Morrisons rode out to the eastern pastures early this morning to move their herd to better grazing. The Pattersons are in Phoenix, dealing with some legal matter about their land claim." As she spoke, I began to understand the full scope of the problem through a series of unfortunate coincidences. Nearly every adult in Copper Valley had been away from home when the fire started, leaving their children in Martha's care as they often did. What should have been a simple day of child minding had suddenly become something much more serious. "How bad do you think it is?" I asked, though I could already see the answer in the way the smoke was spreading across the southern horizon like spilled ink. "Bad," Martha replied simply. "The wind is starting to pick up, and it's blowing this way. If those fires jump the ridge and come down into the valley..." She didn't finish the sentence. But she didn't need to. We both knew what happened when wildfire met drought-dried grassland. That's when young Jacob Morrison, the oldest of the children, came running up to us with his face flushed from excitement and fear. "Mrs. Sullivan," he panted, "I climbed up on your roof to get a better look, and I can see flames now, not just smoke. They're moving fast, and they're coming this way." Martha and I exchanged a look that said everything without words. The fires weren't just a distant threat anymore. They were an immediate danger that was bearing down on our valley with the speed and fury of a runaway locomotive. "Children," Martha called out, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made every young head turn toward her immediately. "I need you all to listen very carefully. We're going to play a special game today, but it's a very important game where everyone needs to follow the rules exactly." I watched in amazement as she gathered the 12 children around her, their faces showing various degrees of understanding and fear, but all of them trusting her completely. These weren't her own children, they were the sons and daughters of neighbors, entrusted to her care, but she spoke to them with the fierce protectiveness of a mother bear defending her cubs. "The game is called Moving Day," Martha continued, her voice steady and reassuring despite the growing wall of smoke on the horizon. "We're going to pretend that we're pioneers moving to a new home. And we need to pack up everything important and travel together to a safe place." Little Sarah Patterson, only 4 years old, raised her hand like she was in school. "Mrs. Sullivan, where are we going to move to?" Martha knelt down to the child's level, her blue eyes serious but kind. "We're going to move north, sweetheart. To the old mine shaft in the hills. It's going to be like camping. But we need to be very brave and very careful." The mention of the old mine shaft sent a chill through me, child, because I knew exactly what Martha was thinking. The abandoned copper mine in the northern hills was the only place in the valley that might offer real protection from a wildfire. Carved deep into solid rock, with stone walls that wouldn't burn and a narrow entrance that could be defended if necessary. But it was also 3 miles away through rough terrain. And getting 12 children there safely while a wildfire bore down on us would be like trying to outrun a stampeding herd of cattle on foot. The youngest child, little Emma Patterson, was barely 3 years old and couldn't walk that distance on her own. The oldest, Jacob Morrison, was strong for his 12 years but still just a boy. "Martha," I said quietly, pulling her aside while the children began gathering their few belongings as she'd instructed. "Are you sure about this? 3 miles through the hills with 12 children, and that fire moving as fast as it is." Martha's jaw was set with the kind of determination I'd seen in soldiers preparing for battle. "What choice do we have, Abby? We can't stay here. This cabin will go up like kindling the moment the fire reaches the valley floor, and we can't wait for the men to come back, because by then it might be too late." She was right, of course. The smoke on the horizon was no longer a thin column, but a massive wall of grey and black that seemed to stretch from one end of the southern mountains to the other, even as we watched. We could see the orange glow of flames beginning to show through the haze, and the wind was definitely picking up, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning wood and grass. "How long do you think we have?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Martha shaded her eyes and studied the approaching fire with the practiced gaze of someone who'd lived through prairie fires in Kansas. 2 hours, maybe 3 if we're lucky. The fire's moving fast, but it still has to cross the ridge and come down into the valley. If we leave now and move quickly, we can reach the mine before it gets here. That's when she made the decision that would define her as a hero in my mind forever. Instead of trying to save herself and her own 2 children, instead of taking the easy path and leaving the other children to fend for themselves, Martha Sullivan chose to take responsibility for every single young life that had been entrusted to her care. "Children," she called out, her voice carrying clearly over the growing wind, "we need to be very organized about our moving day. Jacob, you're the oldest, so you're going to be my assistant. I need you to help the little ones and make sure nobody gets left behind." Jacob straightened up with the pride of a boy given an important responsibility. "Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Sullivan. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to pair up with Emma," Martha said, indicating the youngest child. "She's going to be your special partner for the journey." "Tommy." She turned to her own 6-year-old son. "You're going to help Sarah Patterson, and I want you to hold her hand the whole time we're walking." I watched in amazement as Martha organized the children into a system that would keep them together and safe during the dangerous journey ahead. She paired the older children with the younger ones, creating a buddy system that would ensure no one got lost or left behind. "Mrs. Sullivan?" asked 8-year-old Mary Henderson. her voice small with fear. What if the fire catches us? What if we can't run fast enough? Martha knelt down and took the little girl's hands in her own, her voice gentle but firm. Mary, do you remember the story I told you about the brave princess who had to lead her people through the dark forest too? Safety, and Mary nodded, her eyes wide. Well, today we're going to be just like that princess and her people. We're going to be brave, we're going to stick together, and we're going to take care of each other. And just like in the story, we're going to reach safety because we're not going to give up. The children seemed to draw strength from Martha's calm confidence, and I could see their fear being replaced by determination. She had a gift for making even the most frightening situations seem manageable, for giving children the courage they needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Abby, Martha said, turning to me, I need you to ride ahead to the mine and make sure the entrance is clear. Take whatever supplies you can carry, water, food, blankets. We're going to need everything we can get once we reach shelter. I nodded, understanding my role in the plan. What about you? How are you going to manage 12 children on foot across 3 miles of rough terrain? Martha's smile was grim but determined. The same way mothers have been protecting their children since the beginning of time, one step at a time, with love and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to let anything happen to them. As I rode hard toward the old mine shaft, my heart was pounding, not just from the exertion, but from the terrible responsibility that had fallen on Martha Sullivan's shoulders behind me. I could hear her voice calling out instructions to the children, organizing them for what might be the most dangerous journey any of them would ever take. The abandoned copper mine was located in a rocky outcropping about halfway up the northern hill, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through scrub brush and loose stone. It had been worked for maybe 2 years before the vein played out, leaving behind a tunnel that extended about 50 feet into solid rock, deep enough to provide real shelter, but not so deep that we'd risk getting lost in the darkness. When I reached the mine entrance, I was relieved to find it clear of debris and large enough to accommodate our group. The opening was about 6 feet wide and 8 feet high, carved into granite that wouldn't burn no matter how hot the fire got. Inside, the tunnel was cool and dry, with enough space for 12 children and 2 adults to wait out even the worst wildfire. I quickly unloaded the supplies I'd brought: water jugs, dried food, blankets, and a lantern with extra oil. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As I worked, I could see the smoke behind me growing thicker and darker. And now I could hear something that made my blood run cold: the distant roar of flames consuming everything in their path. The fire was moving faster than any of us had anticipated, driven by winds that seemed to be growing stronger by the hour. What had started as separate blazes in the southern mountains had merged into one massive conflagration that was racing toward Copper Valley like a living thing hungry for destruction. I mounted my horse and rode back toward Martha's cabin as fast as I dared on the treacherous hillside trail. When I crested the ridge that overlooked the valley, what I saw below made me gasp in horror and admiration both. Martha had gotten all 12 children organized and moving. But the sight of that small procession making its way across the valley was both heartbreaking and inspiring. She walked at the front of the group, carrying 3-year-old Emma Patterson in her arms while her own 4-year-old daughter Sarah clung to her skirts. Behind her came the other children in their assigned pairs, the older ones helping the younger ones over rough ground and obstacles. Jacob Morrison, true to his role as Martha's assistant, brought up the rear of the group, constantly looking back to make sure no one was falling behind. Even from a distance, I could see the determination in his young face, the way he'd taken on the responsibility of protecting children even smaller than himself. But what struck me most was Martha herself, this small woman, barely 5 feet tall, and weighing maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, was carrying a 30-pound child while leading 11 others across miles of difficult terrain, all while a wildfire bore down on them from behind. She moved with the steady, relentless pace of someone who knew that stopping meant death for everyone under her protection. The fire was visible now as more than just smoke. I could see the actual flames cresting the southern ridge, a wall of orange and red that stretched across the entire horizon. The roar was getting louder too, like the sound of 1,000 locomotives all running at full steam, and the wind was carrying burning embers that sparked new fires wherever they landed. I rode down to meet the group, and when I reached them, I could see the exhaustion and fear in the children's faces, but also something else, absolute trust in the woman who was leading them to safety. They believed in Martha Sullivan completely, and that faith was giving them the strength to keep moving even when their small legs were tired and their throats were parched from the smoke-filled air. "How much farther, Mrs. Sullivan?" asked 6-year-old Billy Henderson, his voice hoarse from breathing the increasingly thick air. "Not much farther, sweetheart," Martha replied, though I could hear the strain in her own voice. "We're going to play another game now. It's called Follow the Leader. And I'm going to be the leader. Everyone needs to step exactly where I step, and keep moving no matter what." That's when I realized the true genius of Martha's approach, by turning their desperate flight into a series of games. She was keeping the children focused on following instructions rather than dwelling on the terror of their situation. She was giving them something to do with their fear, a way to channel it into action rather than panic. "Martha," I called out as I dismounted, "the mine is ready. How are you holding up?" She turned to look at me, and I could see the exhaustion in her blue eyes, but also an unshakable determination. "We're going to make it, Abby. We have to make it. These children are counting on me, and I won't let them down." The sight that greeted us as we continued toward the mine was both terrifying and inspiring. Child. The wall of fire had crested the southern ridge and was now pouring down into Copper Valley like a molten river, consuming everything in its path. The grass that had been brown and brittle from the drought caught fire instantly, creating a carpet of flames that raced across the valley floor faster than a horse could run. Martha never broke stride, never showed the children how frightened she truly was, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she calculated distances and time. We were still more than a mile from the mine, and the fire was maybe 2 miles behind us, but it was moving much faster than our small group could travel on foot. "Mrs. Sullivan." Little Tommy Morrison called out, his voice tight with fear. "The fire's getting closer. I can feel the heat on my back." Martha stopped the group for just a moment, turning to face the children with that same calm authority that had marked her from the beginning. "Tommy, you're right. The fire is getting closer. But do you know what that means? It means we're winning our race. Every step we take is a step closer to safety, and every step the fire takes is a step closer to having nothing left to burn." It was a masterful piece of child psychology. Taking their fear and turning it into hope, the children straightened up, drawing strength from Martha's confidence, and the group resumed its steady march toward the northern hills. But as we climbed higher, the terrain became more difficult. The trail was rocky and steep, with loose stones that could turn an ankle and thorny brush that caught at clothes and skin. Little Emma Patterson, who Martha had been carrying for over an hour, was getting heavier with each step, and I could see the strain beginning to show in Martha's face. "Let me take her for a while," I offered, reaching for the exhausted child. Martha shook her head firmly. "Emma's frightened, and she trusts me. If I hand her off to someone else, she might panic, and we can't afford to have any of the children lose their composure now." That's when Jacob Morrison, that brave 12-year-old boy, stepped up and showed the kind of character that would serve him well in the years to come. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, What if I carry some of the supplies? That way you won't have to worry about anything except Emma." Martha smiled at him, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since the crisis began. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Jacob, you take the water jug, and Billy Henderson, you take the food sack. We're all going to help each other get to safety." The children responded to this call for cooperation with the kind of enthusiasm that only the young can muster in the face of danger. The older ones took on extra responsibilities without complaint, helping the younger ones over difficult patches of trail, sharing their water when someone got thirsty, offering encouragement when someone stumbled or fell behind. But it was Martha who held them all together, who kept them moving when exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm them. She told stories as they walked, spinning tales of brave children who overcame impossible odds, of heroes who never gave up no matter how dark things seemed. "Once upon a time," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of their footsteps on stone, "there were 12 brave children who had to cross a magic mountain to reach the castle where they'd be safe. The mountain was guarded by a terrible dragon made of fire and smoke, but the children weren't afraid because they had each other. The children hung on every word, their imaginations transforming their desperate flight into an adventure story where they were the heroes. It was brilliant, child." Martha was giving them a way to be brave, a narrative framework that let them see themselves as protagonists in their own rescue rather than victims of circumstance. As we climbed higher, I could see the fire spreading across the valley floor below us, consuming Martha's cabin, the Henderson place, everything that these families had worked so hard to build. The heat was intense even at our elevation, and the smoke was so thick that we had to cover our faces with cloth to breathe. "Mrs. Sullivan," gasped 8-year-old Mary Henderson, "I can't see the trail anymore. The smoke is too thick." Martha stopped and gathered the children around her, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding us. "Mary, that's why we're going to play a new game now. It's called Trust Walk. And everyone is going to hold hands so we stay together even when we can't see clearly." She formed them into a human chain, child, with the oldest children at the front and back, and the youngest ones protected in the middle. Martha took the lead, feeling her way along the rocky trail with her feet while little Emma clung to her neck, and Jacob Morrison brought up the rear, making sure no one let go of the hand they were holding. The smoke was so thick now that we could barely see 3 feet in any direction, and the heat was like walking into an oven. The children were coughing and wheezing, their eyes streaming tears from the acrid air, but not one of them complained or asked to stop. They trusted Martha completely, following her blindly through what must have seemed like the very gates of hell. "Keep talking to each other," Martha called back to them, her voice muffled by the cloth she tied over her nose and mouth. "I want to hear every voice, so I know everyone's still with us. Tell me what you're going to do when we reach the castle in our story. I'm going to have a big feast," called out 6-year-old Tommy Sullivan, Martha's own son, his voice brave despite the fear I could hear underneath. "I'm going to sleep for a whole day," added Mary Henderson, and the other children began chiming in with their own plans, their voices creating a lifeline of sound that kept the group connected even when they couldn't see each other. But as we climbed higher, the trail became more treacherous. The rocks were loose and unstable, made slippery by the ash that was falling like grey snow all around us. I watched in terror as little Billy Henderson stumbled and nearly fell off the narrow path, saved only by the quick reflexes of his partner, minus 1-year-old Susan Morrison. That's when Martha made a decision that showed just how desperate our situation had become. Instead of continuing on the main trail, which switched back up the mountainside in long, gentle curves, she turned off onto a much steeper, more direct route that would cut our travel time in half, but increase the danger tenfold. Martha, I called out, grabbing her arm. That's not a real trail, it's just a game path, barely wide enough for one person. With 12 children in this smoky, we don't have a choice, Abby, she replied, her voice tight with strain. Look behind us. I turned and gasped at what I saw. The fire had reached the base of the hills and was beginning to climb, following the same route we'd taken. Flames were licking at rocks and bushes only a few hundred yards below us, and the heat was so intense that I could feel it singeing the hair on my arms. The main trail will take us another hour, Martha continued, and we don't have an hour. This shortcut will get us to the mine in 20 minutes, but everyone has to be very, very careful. She gathered the children around her one more time, her voice taking on the tone of a general addressing troops before a crucial battle. Children, we're going to play the most important game of all now. It's called Mountain Climbers. And the rules are very simple. You stay in line, you hold hands, you step exactly where the person in front of you steps, and you don't look down. Little Sarah Patterson, only 3 years old, looked up at Martha with eyes that were wide with fear, but also filled with trust. Mrs. Sullivan, what if I fall? Martha knelt down and took the child's face in her hands, her voice gentle but absolutely certain. Sarah, sweetheart, you're not going to fall because I won't let you fall. None of you are going to fall because we're all going to take care of each other. That's what families do, and right now we're all one big family. The word family seemed to resonate with the children, giving them a sense of belonging and mutual responsibility that was stronger than their individual fears. They straightened up, squared their small shoulders, and prepared to follow Martha Sullivan up a path that would have challenged experienced mountain climbers, let alone a group of frightened children. As we began the treacherous climb, I realized that we were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a rescue anymore, it was a transformation. These 12 children, faced with the most terrifying experience of their young lives, were discovering reserves of courage and determination they never knew they possessed, and at the center of it all was Martha Sullivan, a small woman who had somehow found the strength to carry not just the physical burden of leading them to safety, but the emotional burden of keeping their spirits alive in the face of almost certain death. The climb up that treacherous goat path was like something out of a nightmare, child. The smoke was so thick we could barely breathe. The heat so intense it felt like we were walking through the mouth of a furnace, and the path so narrow that one wrong step would send any of us tumbling down the rocky slope to certain death. Martha led the way with little Emma still clinging to her neck, feeling for each foothold with the careful precision of someone who knew that 12 young lives depended on her not making a single mistake. Behind her, the children followed in their human chain, each one stepping exactly where she stepped, trusting her completely even though they could barely see her through the choking smoke. One step at a time, Martha called back to them, her voice hoarse from the smoke, but still steady and reassuring. Don't think about how far we have to go, just think about the next step. And then the next one after that, but the fire below. US was climbing faster than we were. I could hear the roar getting louder, could feel the heat growing more intense with each passing minute. Burning embers were falling around us like deadly snow, starting small fires in the dry brush that lined the narrow path. That's when disaster struck. Child, little Tommy Henderson, only 5 years old and exhausted from the long climb, stumbled on a loose rock and fell to his knees. His partner, 8-year-old Susan Morrison, tried to help him up, but in the process, she lost her own footing and started to slide backward down the steep slope. Help! Susan screamed, her small hands scrabbling for purchase on the loose stones as she slid toward the edge of the path without hesitation. Jacob Morrison let go of his partner's hand and lunged forward, grabbing Susan's wrist just as she was about to fall off the narrow ledge. But the sudden movement broke the human chain, and for a terrifying moment, the whole group was in danger of coming apart. "Everyone freeze," Martha commanded, her voice cutting through the panic like a whip crack. "Nobody move until I say so." She carefully set Emma down on a relatively stable section of the path, then worked her way back to where Jacob was holding Susan, his 12-year-old arm straining with the effort of keeping her from falling. Martha grabbed Susan under her arms and hauled her back onto the path, then quickly reformed the human chain. "Is everyone all right?" she asked, checking each child for injuries. Susan was crying and shaking, her hands scraped raw from trying to stop her fall, but she was alive. Tommy Henderson was bleeding from a cut on his knee, but he was determined not to slow down the group. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan," Susan sobbed. "I almost ruined everything." Martha knelt down and pulled the frightened girl into her arms, her voice gentle but firm. "Susan, sweetheart, you didn't ruin anything. You had an accident, and Jacob helped you. And now we're all safe." That's what families do. We help each other when someone falls. But even as she comforted the children, I could see the worry in Martha's eyes. The fall had cost us precious time, and the fire was getting closer. We could see flames now through the smoke, licking at the rocks only 100 yards below us, and the heat was becoming unbearable. "How much farther?" asked Mary Henderson, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha looked up the slope toward where the mine entrance should be, though it was invisible through the thick smoke. "Not far now, children. Just a little bit farther, and we'll be safe." But I could tell she was worried. The smoke was so thick that we could easily walk right past the mine entrance without seeing it. And the fire was climbing so fast that we might not have time to search for it if we got lost. That's when young Jacob Morrison, that brave boy who'd already saved Susan's life, stepped up once again. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "I know these hills pretty well from hunting with my pa. If you let me scout ahead a little bit, I might be able to find the mine entrance." Martha hesitated. Letting a 12-year-old boy out of her sight in these conditions went against every maternal instinct she had, but she also knew that Jacob might be our only hope of finding shelter before the fire caught up with us. "All right, Jacob," she said finally, "but you stay within shouting distance, and if you can't find the entrance in 5 minutes, you come right back. We'll figure out something else." Jacob nodded solemnly and disappeared into the smoke ahead of us, leaving the rest of us huddled on the narrow path while the fire roared up the mountainside below. The children were exhausted, frightened, and beginning to show signs of smoke inhalation. But they still trusted Martha completely, still believed that she would somehow get them to safety. "Mrs. Sullivan," little Emma Patterson whispered, "are we going to die?" Martha gathered the 3-year-old into her arms, her voice as gentle as a lullaby despite the chaos surrounding us. "No, sweetheart, we're not going to die. We're going to reach our castle, just like in the story, and we're all going to be safe and happy." But even as she spoke those comforting words, I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. We were running out of time, running out of options, and the fire was getting closer with every passing second. The minutes that followed Jacob's disappearance into the smoke were the longest of my life. "Child," we huddled together on that narrow ledge, listening to the roar of the approaching fire and straining our ears for any sound from the brave boy who'd volunteered to find our salvation. The children were coughing constantly now, their small lungs struggling with the thick, acrid air, and I could see Martha fighting her own battle against despair. "Mrs. Sullivan," wheezed 6-year-old Billy Henderson, "I can't breathe very good." Martha immediately tore a strip of cloth from her own skirt and soaked it with water from one of our precious jugs, then tied it around Billy's face like a mask. "This will help, sweetheart," she said, though I could hear the strain in her voice. "Just breathe slowly and try to stay calm." But the truth was that we were all struggling to breathe. The smoke was so thick it was like trying to inhale soup, and the heat was so intense that it felt like we were standing inside a baker's oven. Several of the children were beginning to show signs of heat exhaustion, pale faces, rapid breathing, confusion, and I knew we couldn't survive much longer in these conditions. That's when we heard something that made our blood run cold, the sound of rocks falling somewhere above us, followed by a cry of pain that could only have come from Jacob Morrison. "Jacob," Martha called out, her voice cracking with fear. "Jacob, can you hear me?" There was no answer except the roar of the fire and the whistle of wind through the rocks. Martha looked at me with eyes that held all the agony of a mother who might have just sent a child to his death. "I have to go find him," she said, starting to hand Emma to me. "No," I said firmly, taking her arm. "You can't leave the other children. I'll go." But before either of us could move, we heard Jacob's voice calling through the smoke, weak but alive. "Mrs. Sullivan, I found it. I found the mine. But I'm hurt. I can't get back to you." Martha's face went through a series of expressions: relief that Jacob was alive, fear that he was injured, and desperate calculation as she tried to figure out how to get 12 children to a destination she couldn't see. Guided only by the voice of a hurt boy. "Jacob," she called back, "how badly are you hurt? Can you keep talking so we can follow your voice?" "I think I broke my ankle." Jacob's voice came back, fainter now, "but I can talk." "The mine entrance is maybe 50 yards from where you are, but you have to climb up and then go left around a big boulder." Martha gathered the children around her one more time, her voice taking on the tone of someone who knew this was their last chance. "Children, we're going to play one final game. It's called Follow the Voice, and Jacob is going to be our guide. We have to move quickly now, but we also have to be very, very careful." The children nodded solemnly, understanding without being told that this was the moment when everything would be decided. They reformed their human chain, but now they were moving with the desperate urgency of people who knew that death was only minutes behind them. The climb to the mine entrance was a nightmare of loose rocks, thorny brush, and choking smoke. The children stumbled and fell repeatedly, their small hands bleeding from grabbing at sharp stones, their clothes torn by thorns, but they never let go of each other. Never broke the chain that was their lifeline in the darkness. "Keep talking, Jacob," Martha called out as we climbed, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I'm here, Mrs. Sullivan," came the reply, though it sounded weaker than before. "You're getting closer, just a little bit more." But the fire was getting closer too. I could feel the heat on my back like the breath of some enormous beast, could hear the crackling and roaring as it consumed everything in its path. Burning embers were falling all around us now, starting small fires that would soon merge into one great conflagration. That's when little Emma Patterson, who Martha had been carrying for hours, finally succumbed to the smoke and heat. The 3-year-old went limp in Martha's arms, her breathing shallow and rapid, her small face pale as death. "Emma," Martha cried, stopping to check the child's pulse. "Emma, sweetheart, stay with me." The other children gathered around, their faces showing the terror of seeing one of their own collapse. This was the moment when everything could have fallen apart, when fear and despair could have overwhelmed the courage that had brought them this far. But Martha Sullivan, that remarkable woman, found strength she didn't know she possessed. "Emma's just very tired," she told the children, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "She needs to rest in the castle, and we're almost there. Jacob, can you hear me? We're coming." "I'm here," Jacob's voice called back, closer. Now but definitely weaker, just around this boulder. Hey, Mrs. Sullivan, I can see the fire coming up the mountain. With Emma Patterson unconscious in her arms and the fire roaring up the mountainside behind us, Martha Sullivan faced the darkest moment of her heroic journey, child. The smoke was so thick we could barely see our own hands, the heat so intense. It felt like the very air was on fire, and now one of the children she'd sworn to protect was slipping away from life itself. This way, Jacob's voice called through the choking haze, weaker now, but still guiding us toward salvation. I can see the mine entrance. It's right here. Martha stumbled forward, carrying Emma's limp form while trying to keep the other 11 children together in their human chain. The rocky ground was treacherous, covered with loose stones and burning embers that had fallen from the sky like deadly rain. Several of the children were crying now, their courage finally beginning to crack under the weight of exhaustion and terror. I can't go any farther, sobbed little Sarah Patterson, Emma's 4-year-old sister, as she collapsed to her knees on the rocky path. I'm too tired, and I can't breathe. That's when the situation went from desperate to seemingly hopeless. The fire had reached the base of our section of the mountain and was climbing toward us with terrifying speed. Through the smoke, we could see the orange glow of flames maybe 200 yards below, consuming everything in their path and leaving nothing but blackened rock behind. Mrs. Sullivan called out Mary Henderson, her 8-year-old voice tight with panic. The fire's going to catch us. We're not going to make it. For the first time since the crisis began, I saw doubt creep into Martha's eyes. She looked at the unconscious child in her arms, at the 11 exhausted children depending on her for their lives, at the wall of fire climbing toward us. And I could see her calculating the impossible mathematics of the situation. But then something remarkable happened, child. Instead of giving in to despair, Martha Sullivan found a reserve of strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. She gently laid Emma down on a flat section of rock, checked to make sure the child was still breathing, then turned to face the other children with an expression of absolute determination. Children, she said, her voice cutting through their sobs and the roar of the approaching fire, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We are going to reach that mine. And we are all going to be safe, but I need every one of you to be braver than you've ever been in your lives. She picked up Emma again, cradling the unconscious child against her chest, then looked each of the other children in the eye. Tommy, Billy, Mary, Sarah, Susan, all of you. You are not just children anymore. Today, you are heroes and heroes. Don't give up, no matter how scared they are, no matter how tired they are, no matter how impossible things seem. The children straightened up at her words, drawing strength from her unshakable faith in them. Even little 4-year-old Sarah Patterson stopped crying and reached for her partner's hand, ready to continue the desperate climb. Jacob, Martha called out, her voice carrying clearly through the smoke, we're coming, keep talking so we can find you. I'm here, Mrs. Sullivan, came the reply. Definitely closer now, just around this big rock. I can see the mine entrance. We stumbled forward through the smoke and heat, following Jacob's voice like a beacon in the darkness. The children were beyond exhaustion now, running on nothing but will and trust in the woman who'd promised to save them. Their small faces were streaked with soot and tears, their clothes torn and singed, but they kept moving, kept holding hands, kept believing in Martha's promise of safety. That's when we finally saw it, the dark opening in the rock face that marked the entrance to the old copper mine. Jacob Morrison was sitting beside it, his face pale with pain and his ankle clearly twisted at an unnatural angle, but alive and conscious and waving us toward shelter. There Martha cried, her voice breaking with relief and exhaustion. There's our castle. We made it, children. We actually made it. But even as she spoke those words of triumph, I could see the fire cresting the ridge below us. A wall of flame and smoke that was maybe 50 yards away and climbing fast. We'd found our shelter, but we still had to reach it before the fire reached us. The final 50 yards to the mine entrance became a race against death itself. Child, Martha Sullivan, carrying unconscious little Emma Patterson in her arms, led the desperate charge toward safety while the wall of fire roared up the mountainside behind us like some ancient dragon breathing destruction across the land. Run, Martha shouted, though her voice was barely audible over the sound of the approaching flames. Everyone run as fast as you can, but don't let go of each other's hands. The children responded with the last reserves of strength they possessed, their small legs pumping as they stumbled and scrambled over the rocky ground toward the dark opening that represented their only hope of survival. Jacob Morrison, despite his broken ankle, was calling out encouragement from beside the mine entrance, his young voice cracking with emotion as he watched his friends racing against time. Come on, Mary, come on, Tommy, you can make it, he shouted. Tears streaming down his soot-stained face, Martha reached the mine entrance first, gently laying Emma's unconscious form just inside the cool darkness before turning back to help the other children. One by one, they tumbled into the safety of the tunnel, Billy Henderson and his partner Susan Morrison, little Sarah Patterson clinging to Tommy Sullivan's hand, Mary Henderson and the others. All of them gasping and coughing but alive. I was the last one to reach the entrance, and as I turned to look back at the inferno behind us, I saw something that will stay with me until my dying day. The entire mountainside was ablaze, a wall of fire that stretched from the valley floor to the peaks above, consuming everything in its path with a fury that seemed almost supernatural. We made it, Martha whispered, her voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. Dear God in heaven, we actually made it. Inside the mine tunnel, the air was cool and clean, a blessed relief after hours of breathing smoke and ash. Martha immediately began checking each child for injuries, her maternal instincts taking over now that the immediate danger had passed. Most of them were suffering from smoke inhalation and exhaustion, but they were alive. And that was what mattered, little. Emma Patterson began to stir in Martha's arms, her eyes fluttering open as the clean air helped clear her lungs. Mrs. Sullivan, she whispered, her voice barely audible, are we in the castle now? Martha's face broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all day. And she hugged the little girl close to her chest. Yes, sweetheart, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. We're in the castle, and we're all safe now. The children gathered around Martha in the cool darkness of the tunnel, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something else, a new kind of confidence. That came from having survived the impossible. They had walked through fire and smoke, had climbed treacherous mountain paths, had faced their worst fears, and emerged victorious. Mrs. Sullivan, said Jacob Morrison, wincing as he tried to move his injured ankle. You saved us all. If it wasn't for you, we would have died in that fire. Martha shook her head, her voice gentle but firm. No, Jacob, we saved each other. Every one of you was brave today. Braver than most grown men would have been. You took care of each other. You never gave up, and you proved that even children can be heroes when they have to be. As we settled in to wait for the fire to burn itself out, Martha began telling the children stories again, her voice weaving tales of courage and adventure that helped them process what they'd just experienced. She transformed their terrifying ordeal into an epic quest, with each child playing the role of a brave knight or princess who'd helped save the kingdom. Outside the mine, the fire raged for another 6 hours, consuming everything in Copper Valley before finally burning itself out against the rocky peaks. When we finally emerged from our shelter the next morning, the landscape had been transformed into a blackened wasteland, but we were alive, all 13 of us. thanks to the courage and determination of one remarkable woman. The rescue of Martha Sullivan and the 12 children she'd saved became the stuff of legend throughout Arizona Territory. Child. When the search parties finally reached us at the mine 3 days later, they found something that defied all expectations. 13 survivors who had not only lived through one of the worst wildfires in territorial history, but had emerged from the ordeal stronger and more united than ever before. Thomas was among the first rescuers to reach us, his face streaked with tears of relief when he saw me emerge from the mine entrance. Behind him came the other parents, the Hendersons returning from Tucson, the Morrisons from their cattle drive, the Pattersons from Phoenix, all of them fearing the worst but hoping against hope that somehow their children had survived the inferno. Martha, whispered Mrs. Henderson as she gathered her 3 children into her arms. How did you do it? How did you get them all to safety? Martha, who was sitting on a rock outside the mine entrance with little Emma Patterson still clinging to her like a lifeline, looked up with eyes that held a new kind of wisdom. I didn't do it alone, Mrs. Henderson. These children saved themselves. I just showed them that they were braver than they knew. The scene of that reunion was something I'll never forget, parents weeping with joy as they held children they'd thought were lost forever, children chattering excitedly about their adventure and how brave they'd all been, and Martha Sullivan sitting quietly in the middle of it all, watching the families come back together with the satisfaction of someone who'd kept a sacred promise. Dr. Patterson, who'd ridden out with the rescue party, examined each child carefully and pronounced them all in remarkably good health considering what they'd been through. A few cases of smoke inhalation, some cuts and bruises, Jacob's broken ankle, but nothing that wouldn't heal with time and care. It's miraculous, he told the assembled parents. By all rights, they should have perished in that fire. The fact that they're all alive and relatively unharmed, well, it's nothing short of a miracle. But the real miracle wasn't just their survival, it was the transformation that had taken place in those 12 children during their ordeal. They'd gone into that fire as ordinary youngsters, but they'd emerged as something more, young people who'd discovered reserves of courage and determination they never knew they possessed. Mrs. Sullivan, said young Jacob Morrison, hobbling over on his makeshift crutch. My pa wants to know if you'd accept a reward for saving us all, he says. He'll give you anything you want. Martha smiled and ruffled the boy's hair, her voice gentle but firm. Jacob, the only reward I want is to see you and all the other children grow up to be the kind of people I know you can be. You've all proven that you have heroes' hearts. Don't ever forget that. As the rescue party prepared to take us back to what remained of Copper Valley, Martha took one last look at the mine that had sheltered us during the worst night of our lives. The entrance was blackened with soot, and the surrounding rocks were still warm from the fire's passage, but inside, the tunnel remained cool and safe, a testament to the wisdom of her choice. Thank you, she whispered to the mountain itself, her voice barely audible above the wind. Thank you for keeping them safe. The journey back to the valley was like traveling through a moonscape. Everything was gone, the cabins, the barns, the fences, even most of the trees. The fire had been so intense that it had burned right down to the bedrock in places, leaving nothing but ash and twisted metal where homes and dreams had once stood. But as devastating as the destruction was, there was also something hopeful about the scene. Already, green shoots were beginning to push up through the ash, and the surviving families were talking not about leaving, but about rebuilding. The fire had destroyed their possessions, but it hadn't broken their spirit. Martha Sullivan spent the next 3 years helping to rebuild Copper Valley, child, but her true contribution went far beyond raising new cabins and fencing new pastures. She had planted something in the souls of those 12 children that would grow and spread throughout the entire community. The understanding that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. The children she saved that terrible day never forgot the lessons they learned on the journey to the mine. Jacob Morrison grew up to become county sheriff, known for his courage in facing impossible situations. Mary Henderson became a teacher, inspiring generations of children with stories about bravery and determination. Tommy Sullivan followed in Martha's footsteps, dedicating his life to protecting and caring for others. Mrs. Sullivan taught me that being a hero doesn't mean not being afraid. Jacob told me years later, when he was already a grown man with children of his own, it means doing what's right even when you're scared, even when it seems impossible. Martha never remarried, dedicating her life to caring for the children of Copper Valley and neighboring communities. She became something of a living legend, the woman who had walked through fire with 12 children and brought them all back safely. People traveled from far away just to meet her, to hear her story, to learn from her wisdom, but Martha always deflected attention from herself, directing it toward the children she had saved. "I didn't do anything special," she would say when people called her a hero. "I just did what any mother would do, protected the children who were in my care. The real bravery came from them, not from me." The Copper Valley fire forever changed how frontier communities thought about disaster preparedness. Martha organized regular drills, teaching entire families how to evacuate quickly, how to find shelter, how to work together in times of crisis. Her techniques spread throughout the territory, saving countless lives in the years that followed. She also established what she called the buddy system, an arrangement where older children were paired with younger ones during emergencies, creating a support network that ensured no one would be left behind. It was the same system she had used during the desperate flight to the mine, and it proved so effective that it was adopted by schools and communities throughout the American West. The last time I saw Martha was in the fall of 1905. When she was 62 years old, her hair was completely white now, and her face was marked by years of desert sun. But her blue eyes still blazed with the same fierce determination that had saved 12 lives on that terrible day. "Abby," she said as we sat on her porch, watching children play in the safe streets of Copper Valley, "sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing that day. If I shouldn't have tried to find a safer way, an easier path." "Martha," I replied, taking her weathered hand in mine, "you saved 12 lives, 12 children grew up, got married, had children of their own, contributed to their communities, all because you had the courage to do what seemed impossible." She smiled, but I could see the melancholy in her eyes. "I just hope they remember the right lessons, that they remember they're stronger than they imagine, braver than they know, more capable than anyone ever told them." Martha Sullivan died peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1907, at the age of 64. Her funeral was the largest Copper Valley had ever seen, with people coming from throughout the territory to pay their final respects to the woman who had become a symbol of maternal courage and selfless sacrifice. The 12 children she had saved, now adults with families of their own, carried her coffin, and each of them spoke about how Martha had changed their lives, not just by saving them from the fire, but by teaching them that they had the power to save themselves. "Now, child, as the fire burns low and this old woman prepares to rest, I want you to remember this story. Remember Martha Sullivan, who proved that a mother's love can move mountains, that determination can overcome any obstacle, that ordinary people can work miracles when they refuse to accept defeat. But more importantly, remember those 12 children who discovered they were braver than they ever imagined, because that's the real lesson of the story. Not that we need heroes to save us, but that we all have a hero inside us, waiting for the right moment to emerge." The sun is setting now behind these familiar mountains, and I can feel my time growing short. My bones ache with the weight of years and memories, and sometimes I hear voices calling to me from beyond the veil, not the tortured cries of the unjustly killed, but the gentle welcome of those who have found peace at last. But I'm not afraid. I know that when my time comes, I'll see Martha again, and Thomas, and all the other brave souls who stood up against darkness and refused to let evil triumph. We'll be together again, in a place where justice doesn't have to be won at gunpoint, where good people don't have to fear the night. Until then, I'll keep telling this story. Keeping the memory alive, making sure that the truth is passed down to those who need to hear it. Because that's what witnesses do. We remember, we testify, and we make sure that the sacrifices of heroes like Martha Sullivan are never forgotten. Now you know the true story of the woman who saved 12 children from the fire in the Arizona desert, who proved that maternal love can overcome any natural disaster, who showed that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite the fear. Remember this tale, child. Remember it and let it inspire you to find your own courage when life tests your resolve, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to never give up even when all seems lost. That's the end of my witness account. Dear one, the fire's burning low and it's time for an old woman to rest, but the story will live on as long as there are people willing to listen and remember and carry the torch of hope forward into the darkness. And that's the most powerful legacy of all.